thanks for taking the time to meet me today, Shereen. If I can give you a little bit of an introduction, and maybe you can add something to that as well if I missed anything. But you are essentially the HR conversationalist. You're the managing director for HR Rewired.
Yeah.
Highly respected speaker in the HR community, and also releasing videos on your YouTube channel, which I highly recommend people should watch, particularly given commentary and insight for employers and how they engage in the conversation around equity, the Black Lives Matter movement, etc. Does that sum things up?
When I started HR Rewired, the whole rationale behind it was changing the perception of HR, and that was always the thing. And it was pre 31st of May, which is when I did my first video talking about the Black experience and my experience and how I felt. Now, what I say to people is I'm kind of on sabbatical. Like, I don't know how long this sabbatical is, but I am massively passionate. And I think you mentioned my videos. I commit to a video every day, sharing my views, perspectives, and answering some questions on just how we can have meaningful conversations about race.
Yeah.
I use a lot of my personal experience. I'm very challenging. Yeah. I'm very honest. And I basically want to use that to help Black employees in the world of work feel like they've got somebody who understands and who is speaking up in the world of business.
Yeah.
But also to allow businesses who are run by particularly senior white leadership teams, yep, who for whatever reason haven't engaged in this conversation, so that I kind of make it safe to have the real raw conversations. And I'm pokey, but I don't push people away. I use it to bring people in to go, you know what, Shereen's going to tell you like it is.
Yeah, and on a personal note, I find those videos incredibly valuable. And so obviously we're going to walk through some of your views on this call, but certainly anybody who's watching this video, I absolutely recommend that you go to Shereen's YouTube channel and check out those videos there. If you haven't already started your own education, this is a great place to begin that, I'd say. I think for me, clearly the Black Lives Matter movement and actually the conversation around structural racism, how that kind of operates in daily life at work, I think that's kind of brought into sharper focus, or I hope that's been brought into sharper focus for a lot of business leaders, a lot of employees. Clearly, we witnessed the shocking death of George Floyd live on our TV screens. We saw the incident with Amy Cooper in Central Park. And you personally have suspended your consultancy work so that you can focus on kind of sharing insight and the need for change and how employers kind of think about that. So if we kind of start there, like what advice do you give, or what advice would you give to employers? They're trying to enable dialogue with employees on kind of equity within the workplace.
I think the first thing is just on what you touched on, John, which is, I always say to people, you've got to do your work first with this. I always, quite glibly, but I do say ignorance in 2020 is not an excuse, because Google is free.
Yes.
So you can find anything. And I think what I urge people to do is, because I'm very conscious that the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly here in the UK, yep, has been focused on what we see play out on our television screen. So it's about statues, it's about, the protests going through London. And what I've been saying to people is, irrespective of whether you class yourself as pro the movement or not, understand that the root issue that Black Lives Matter is trying to address is the fact that Black people are not treated equally. Yeah. So this is an equality piece. And I urge everybody to remember this, because I've heard lots of conversations and, people end up going, yeah, but, it's not right what they are doing about the statues. It's not right that this, slavery was years ago. And yep, so the conversation is deflected, if I'm really honest, John, to that.
Yep.
So it's this sensationalist stuff that you see on the media. So if you do your own reading, and you know what, if you need to ease yourself in gently, Netflix is a gold mine of yep, stuff. Go and watch Central Park 5, go and watch 13th, because that, although it's very American from the experience, I promise you, it starts to make you question some of the assumptions that you've had about how far or not we've come with this race issue.
Yep.
Because there's still a lot of people in very, very senior leadership positions who genuinely have believed that racism is not a thing in the way that it's being played out.
Because I think there's an overtness versus like an intrinsic nature of that. Part of that education is like, well, learn the difference there between like what is obvious for everyone to see versus what is more difficult that actually requires you to focus on in order to see it.
Absolutely. And that's where you know, when you talked about structural racism,
yeah,
and structural racism, when people go, oh my God, because the word race and racism, everyone goes, oh God, but I'm not racist. And so you have to be able to push back against that. And for some people, particularly white people, have used the whole I'm not racist statement to stop the conversation dead.
Yeah.
And also their minds are, they're not ready to open up and go, let's actually, do you know what, let me hear what you have to say, whoever it is, let me listen with an intent to really hear and understand, versus let me listen to kind of be able to refute and go, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me.
Yeah.
So the structural racism bit is basically saying that we live in a society that places value on white lives versus black lives as depicted in the media.
Yeah.
As depicted when you walk into a business and you will see a sea of white faces, but you may only see one or two black individuals. As depicted when businesses do hire one or two senior people, there will only be one or two.
Yeah.
Because by definition of having that one person, their argument is, well, we've done enough. And it's also a piece around, you know, and everyone forgets this, that because we've wrapped this in diversity and inclusion for a long time.
Yes.
And you know, I've got very specific points about this.
Well, I was going to talk about that specifically, but absolutely, let's move into that, because there's so many companies that go, okay, well, we've got a policy for that, or we have a process in place for that. And yes, without stealing your thunder, it'd be great to get your views, because we, as business leaders, we recognize that term and kind of go, oh, we got this covered. So what's your thought process on that?
My thought process on that is that if I had a penny for every time that somebody offered me a D&I role or wanted to talk to me about it, and I've point blank refused to ever do one. I don't even call myself a diversity and inclusion person. I'm just somebody with plenty to say, you know, about this, because one is because it's very personal for me.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the statistics show that there are more people of colour in D&I roles than anybody else. And the problem is with that is that it's very difficult in the mind of the business leaders to separate what we are pushing because it's the right thing to do versus what we're pushing because of the colour of our skin. And as the individual, it's very difficult to navigate that because you're very conscious of the colour of your skin. So you don't want to push in the way that you would if you're a marketing person pushing to get extra budget. Do you know what I mean? Because you know that somebody's going to say, oh, but you're just saying that because you're black.
Yeah.
And because I've had that said to me and I wasn't even doing a D&I role. So that's one element of it. The other element of it, and it goes back to this point about structural racism, is for black people and minorities to be given fair treatment, in brackets because it's not really worked, but let's imagine it had done. We've had to wrap it in a business initiative that is separate to everything else.
Life, you mean just normal life? Yeah.
So it's not business as usual. It's been separated into diversity and inclusion. And the only way we have been able to make some progress for other minorities, but with this, you know, this is a great example, is fundamentally because black people, we don't have the power to affect change because we are not in the corridors of power and we're not in positions of influence. Our lives can only get better if white people allow our lives to get better. So when you're signing off a D&I initiative or the budget or whatever else it is, what you don't realise is the subcontext underneath that is almost the extent to which you say yes to things.
Yeah.
The extent to which you challenge things is a direct signal about how open you are to making your business an equitable place for Black people, which means it's an equitable place for everybody. Does that make sense?
Total sense.
And then the third element of that is, because for years we have used the economics, so, you know, in business, we all know it, the ROI, the economic benefits of doing X, Y, and Z. And a lot of people, there's been books and, you know, hundreds of books written about the economic benefits of diversity, you know, how it helps you to, you know, Again, the unintended consequence of that and the subtext of that is you are focusing on Black people as an opportunity to make money. And what does that remind you of?
Yeah, that is that's an uncomfortable direction to be going in, right?
Correct.
So if I think about that, so on the one side, businesses want to have this conversation. They need to do the work. They need to listen with the intent to hear. We also need to understand that what we've been doing up until this point is not the same as what we need to do beyond the point. So businesses that are entering into this conversation, they're likely to hear things perhaps that makes them uncomfortable or creates challenge within the business. Just how do you suggest the way businesses conduct this conversation is different to how we've done it before? Because if we think about what we just talked about, is that we can't fix these problems with the solutions that we've been using for 10 years because they're still here, right?
Correct. So the thing that I've said to people is, you know, in the nicest way possible, if you are a white senior leadership team, if you are a white board of directors, non-execs are all white. It doesn't matter which part of the world you come from, what language is your first language, but providing you're all united because of the colour of your skin, you cannot have those uncomfortable conversations if you all look like that.
Yeah.
Because what will happen is, you, to a point, you might say, like, we have to do something about this. We might seem to be doing something about this business. But you almost need somebody, even if it's not me, but if you think about the provocation that I give with everything that I talk about, I'm provoking, and I'm taking people to a level of deep uncomfortable, you know, that they're almost like, oh my God, Shereen, let's stop talking. To some extent, you need that, which means you need to get somebody in a room who can help you facilitate that conversation. And I use the word facilitate in inverted commas because not in the traditional business sense. So, you know, like when somebody comes with the flip chart and the post-it notes and you're like, right, tell me the words that you think about racism, and, you know, you post the flip chart. It's literally just to say, let's have a conversation. And in that conversation, you know, so what I've done is I say my very pointed pieces around, you know, X, Y, and Z. And then we have this debate. And basically, for me, there's no holds barred. So I will challenge super hard, and I challenge hard because I want to push people to that place of discomfort, and then we have that conversation. So my thing is, if you're not feeling really uncomfortable, you're not having the right level of conversation. So you need to get somebody in a room. It can be your employees. You can hire somebody to come in and be very clear on what you're hiring them to do. You can look at people in your ecosystem, so in your supply chain, if you have that, you know, because somebody's got to have, it takes a certain level of bravery and courage to do what I do.
Yeah.
And sometimes businesses go, oh, that's fine, I'll go to my listening forum and they're going to tell me, you know, how it is, or I'll go to my 1 or 2 Black employees and they're going to tell me how it is. But what you also have to understand is the power dynamic. So they are still going to be very fearful of what's going to happen once the excitement of this movement has passed on. Me, I couldn't care less, because like I'm singing like a canary every day. So, you know, it doesn't matter. But I'm very conscious that I am not indicative of what's happening in a lot of businesses. So I always say, you know, to people to be really thoughtful and don't put the pressure on the 1 or 2 Black people that you have in your business because it's convenient. Because when you do that, you're not thinking about the pressure on them, because bearing in mind, they have been living every day, they've been dealing with microaggressions, they've been dealing with the fact that they felt like they've had to shed layers of their Black identity. So just because you've woken up and smelt the roses, and just because you've said it's safe for them to talk, by definition of you saying it doesn't make it so. So, you know, you really have to be thoughtful and start the conversation with the right individual or groups of individuals in the room who you know are going to challenge you.
Yeah.
Because it's no point having like you know, an AA meeting. Do you know what I mean? And it's all a little bit like, because everybody's trying to make everybody else feel better. You know, oh, don't forget that we've done this initiative and that worked, didn't it? You know, and we've got this, and oh, don't forget we've signed off for the diversity and inclusion person. So you can be very quickly fooled into thinking that the actions that you're taking are making a change. And the reality is the actions that you may be taking, and you might have to be honest about this, is just to make sure that your business looks good, but that's not meaningful change.
No, I agree. I think I was talking with one of my team earlier today, and we were talking about different actions that we can take as an organization ourselves, and the concept of training came up, and actually it was partially from listening to what you had to say that you realize that actually this is an old world way of thinking about a problem that needs to be solved. And I think that finding ways through the conversation is not about telling people what to say or how do they react in a situation, because the situation is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and everything that we do. And it's not in a situation, it's just, this is how we should be acting, I think. And then I began to think about businesses that are having this conversation, that are overt within their organization or publicly and saying, yes, we support the Black Lives Matter movement. As a business, we commit to XYZ. And there's a whole other load of businesses that have said nothing to this point in time. And I guess there's a double-edged sword here, is saying something without doing the work, or saying nothing at all. But what do you say to companies that so far have remained silent, either internally or both internally and externally, like on this subject? What would you kind of say to that group?
I think one of the things that my frustration and hurt that drove me to push past my own discomfort and, you know, like in my mind, take a whole lot of risks with my reputation and my career by talking about this, stemmed from when we were in the midst of the lockdown and the pandemic. And I saw how we just universally, this whole community spirit, you know, businesses helping other businesses stopping producing X to produce Y, not to make a profit, but because it was going to help, you know, help the service. You know, strangers going to neighbours and going to deliver medicine. So I saw all of this community spirit. I was also very well aware that Black men and Black women are 4 times more likely to catch coronavirus.
Yeah.
But nobody was talking about that. Black men and Black women take up the majority of a large percentage, not the majority, a large percentage of frontline roles in the NHS, who are treating everybody else, including a lot of white people, to get better from coronavirus. So that was like the context. And then, you know, obviously the stuff from the States. So what I say to businesses is, you can't tell me that you don't have it in your spirit to do that. So you've got to be really honest and say to yourself, why is it when you're seeing on the news, and you might see people like me, and there's lots of other people coming from very different angles, talking about how Black people are not only affected by what's happening in the States, but how it's made us reflect on our position in society. And our reaction to all of that is we're reacting to what I've called the corporate wall of silence. We're reacting to the fact that businesses haven't said anything, but they were the first to say something about what they're doing to support whoever with coronavirus. But yet when it's Black people, there's silence. And what I've been saying is apathy and silence or inaction is an action in itself. Because what it says is, you don't care enough to push past that deep uncomfortable. So you're thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And you don't want to be seen as doing the wrong thing. So you're making this about you and your business and the perception. So until you feel like it's safe for you to do it with minimal blowback, only then will you say something. And I posted this morning on LinkedIn an article that basically said, in years to come, when, you know, like Harvard Business Review, when they're doing all these case studies about businesses and what businesses did in the pandemic, they will also be saying to businesses, what did you do when the civil rights movement of 2020 kicked off? So my thing that I've been saying to people is, which side of history do you want to be on?
Yeah.
Because if you go back to the 1950s and the 1960s, when you had people like, we all applaud, everybody universally, irrespective of your culture, will applaud Martin Luther King, now Malcolm X, when you start to understand the context of what they were talking about.
Yeah.
But potentially your ancestors were also the ones that stood quietly because they were too uncomfortable to speak out. And then if you go back and you think about lynching and segregation and slavery, there would also have been white people who saw that, but who felt uncomfortable because everybody else was doing that, so they stayed silent. So when people try and divorce what's happening now to what history has shown us, my argument is, but it's no different.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's exactly the same thing. And it goes back to, when there is injustice in the world and there are things that are fundamentally unfair, do you continue to keep putting your comfort in front of making meaningful change?
Yeah, and I think that's it, is sometimes when you have the benefit of looking back and you kind of go, yes, of course that makes sense. But actually the movement only starts when actually it happens in that moment. And I think clearly in the last couple of months, the issues that Black people face have been brought to the fore by what we've seen on TV. And that is inspiring movement within companies. And I guess there is a concern, is, are we knee-jerk to what's happening in the media? How will that be perceived? And actually, how do we start down this road with good intentions and try not to be perceived that way? What would you say to companies who have concerns on that front?
I think, you know what, one of the things I think we have to separate out is intent versus impact. Because if we focus on intent, I didn't mean it, you know, I was thinking about other things before I said, you know, before I won't go and do X, Y, and Z, or I don't go and do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. It's a get out of jail card. Because the reality is with this, there's never a good time. You will never always say the right thing. And so you have to be willing to go past that. And again, I keep saying you have to be willing to put your comfort and your position of privilege. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, and I've said this to CEOs pretty much every single day, is that by you not doing anything as a leader, as a business, because you're worried about all the things that you just talked about, Jon, your life still stays the same, but our life never gets any better. Because remember, we need your support. And as awful as this sounds, because of the way society is structured and the way that businesses are a reflection of society, we need your permission. You know, and I've said this many times, that the equivalent of what I'm doing when I'm speaking out every single day and I'm being honest, like you see my tears, you see me be really annoyed, you see the whole, like, even my partners have been a bit like, at some point, can you not just, you know, and I'm like, no, this is really important. But let's be honest, what I'm doing is begging. I am begging on behalf of the Black community. I am begging on behalf of Black employees, because I have very senior Black people messaging me and saying, you know, I can't tell you how validating it is for me to hear you speak in all the honesty that you're speaking. Yeah. And fundamentally, even though I'm in a position of relative seniority in very, very well-known businesses, very FTSE 100 businesses, they cannot say what I'm saying. Yeah. So when you understand that this, and this is what I talk about, the fear that comes with recognizing for us our position is precarious. You know, in the same way that I shed tears the night before, tears in the morning when I was writing my LinkedIn post to share this video, because I was so worried about my reputation, meaning that because I was talking about this Black stuff, that, you know, people wouldn't want to engage with me. And the reality is, Jon, people haven't. So if people are listening thinking I'm going to tell them the rainbow on the side, yes, there's been loads of positives, don't get me wrong, massive amounts of positives. But I've been attacked by CEOs, chair people, non-exec directors who've sent me threatening messages, who've commented on my posts, who have harassed me on social media, who are within the establishment, as you would like to call it. So what I want to say to people is you have to understand that you can kid yourself into thinking that the media is sensationalizing the issue. You can kid yourself into thinking when you see Hollywood black stars talk about their experiences, or when you see people in publishing or people in STEM or people in retail or hospitality or tech. And the sad thing is we are all sharing the same story in terms of the common themes. Like our individual experiences are going to be very different. And that's the bit for many of us where we're going, even though you're hearing all of this and you still can't push past your discomfort, like you've got to look yourself in the mirror and go, what is that about? Because if the shoe was on the other foot, if white people were as affected in the world and in the world of work and in civil injustice and all of that stuff in the way that we are, we would have pulled out all the stops in this country, and you would have expected every other minority to step up and support in the same way that you expected black people to step up and support, in the same way that you expect black people to be in your frontline operations, but we're not good enough to be in your head office, or we're not good enough to be in your senior leadership team. And even those people that say, but that's not what we mean. And I go, no, but the fact that you've never looked at the composition of your workforce and asked the question, why is that? Tells me that you didn't really want to do anything. So that's why I'm very unapologetic, about the challenge that I give, because that's what we need if we're going to push through that inertia and make meaningful change. And for a lot of senior leaders, it means that they may have to unlearn a lot of things that they were conditioned into thinking all of these years, including that the UK doesn't have a race problem. I think we all universally can I think that's put to bed now.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I think a few weeks ago it might have been different, but even then, understand that you might be sitting next to directors metaphorically in a room who fundamentally think that black people are making mountains out of molehills, or think that fundamentally, there's an sense of entitlement, or that they're worried about losing their position to make way for more black people, and who may resist any attempt that you make or as a business to move things forward. And that is also a question, because there's a lot of businesses that are concerned about that, and they are still putting the comfort of those people who aren't 100% racist, but they're certainly not 50% anti-racist.
That's a great way of putting it. As you talk about, and you mentioned this earlier, and it's in one of your videos on YouTube, this corporate wall of silence. And I know you only touched on that as like a phrase, but everything that you've just described this is what happens when you don't talk about it. And so I guess you have been at the forefront of helping people think through this from a business perspective. Certainly, I think you started your daily videos at the end of May, right?
Yeah.
So I suggest people go on and watch those. Are you still doing one every single day?
Every single day, John, I'm turning up.
So they are definitely a great watch. But I guess the question I'd have for you is there feels like lots of things happening, or lots of awakenings, or changes being made, statements being made. What is your view? Do you believe that we're moving forward with this issue, or I'd be interested to know what you.
Do you know what? On one hand, I genuinely believe, otherwise I would not do videos every day if I thought this wasn't the case. I do believe there is a collective awakening almost. It's a bit, I call it, we've been sitting in our conservatories and the windows have been blown off, and we've suddenly gone, oh my God, is that what the garden looks like? Because it's this whole idea of, for years, we've just not, intentionally, unintentionally not seen what life is like, right? Yeah. So I do believe that is a step forward. I think the thing that makes me, that continues to make me speak out about this is to your point, there's still not enough companies talking about this.
Yeah.
There's still not enough companies doing something about this. There's still not enough companies talking to their employees. And I know because their employees are messaging me and saying, Shereen, I know you won't believe this, but after all this time, my business has still not done anything. Yeah. You know, or there's still businesses who behind the scenes trying to hire 4 or 5 black people quick. Or they're trying to go for the D&I person, but they still haven't thought through what the meaningful change is. Yep. You know, so, and I think to some extent, this is where businesses don't understand their influence. So on one hand, you know what, you're right, damned if you do and damned if you don't, but you want to be able to say you try to do something. And I always say to people, you know, if you're going to do your public statement, do that, you know, and understand that people will probably rip it to shreds, like it is what it is, you know, such is life. But be honest with yourselves and say, are we willing to do the real work, not the surface level stuff, the real work that means you have to commit to 2, 3 years, 4 years, the real work that says it will continue long after your tenure.
Yeah.
That's when you go, right, so if that's your starting place, put out your statement and be honest. And I also say, listen, don't underestimate the power of honest reflection, being humble, being authentic. Do you know what? There is more value of you doing a video in your house, so in your, you know, in your natural way, maybe stumbling over your words, potentially saying the wrong thing, all of that, because what that shows is that you've pushed past your discomfort because you want your black employees, and you know I focus on them, but you know it could be people in your supply chain or whatever, and you want them to know that you're serious about this.
Yeah.
It's not, and I always say to people, it's not about having the answers right now, because even me, like if somebody says, oh my God, give me like 20 things, I'll be like, you know, I don't know. That's not it.
Yeah.
You know, it's about, and the starting point is having those conversations, but don't get lost in the conversations that you don't do anything. You know, and to some extent, treat this a little bit like the energy that you would give if there was a department in your business that needed support. You know, that's where innovation comes from, right? You know, experimenting and throwing away stuff that doesn't work. This is no different, because as you said at the very beginning, we need different ways of approaching this. So, and I always say to people, it's not to say that the stuff we've done is wrong, like you need to throw it out. It just, if you never understood the root cause and the real problem, then you could never apply a solution that fits.
Clearly, the responsibility for creating change needs to sit with the people that run their businesses. But what do you say to employees? Perhaps you mentioned employees that their businesses haven't done anything, or maybe they are doing something, they're not quite sure if it's the right thing. Where do employees start, and actually how do they start to create the conversation if that's the way it should?
Yes.
About it, you know.
So one of the things that I've always said is, because I'm still one of these people that's very concerned about coronavirus, so I'm not out protesting in the streets. However, I bring my protest to the boardroom, so that's what I do. And that's what I say to people who are not in positions of power and influence within their business is, don't underestimate the amount of change that you can create just by using your voice and speaking up. So that could be supporting your black colleague because you've seen, now that you understand what microaggressions are, so you understand those things that happen day to day, you know, a white colleague has touched a black woman's hair, or you've overheard a conversation that somebody says, you know, is it true what they say about all black men? Or somebody says, well, you know, it's all very well, like, you know, getting in black people, but we've tried, like, you know, and we can't find any black talent, or, you know, all of this stuff. That's the definition of a microaggression. That's all stuff that happens every single day, chip, that basically seeks to reinforce this narrative that if black people can't make the progress, it's because we're not good enough.
Yeah.
So as if you're witnessing any of that and you feel passionate and you feel galvanized and you're thinking, this is not right, then I say to people, you know what, use your voice. Ask your businesses leaders, like, what's going on with this? If it's gone quiet for a few weeks, go and ask them and say, listen, like, you know, fair enough, like you put the black square up, but like we haven't seen anything else. So, you know, what are you doing? But also you support by doing your own reading, even if your company is not doing a company edict yet, you know, kind of an educational piece, let's understand the context. Go and read, go and listen to podcasts, go and read some books, go and listen to Audible, go on Netflix, Amazon Prime, all of the stuff that we consume information. You do that. But the best thing is we have to get better at speaking up collectively. This is, and as you know, this goes beyond just about Black Lives Matter. This is just in general business life. And I think we've already seen a movement where, particularly from a generational point of view, you know, younger employees are more used to speaking up when things aren't right. But what I think they need is the safety in numbers. So I basically say the more people that are saying the same thing, at some point a business will have to listen, you know. And as awful as it sounds, it's a bit like somebody's going to say, oh my God, Shereen, you're saying we're going to be held to ransom by our employees? And I'm like, well, possibly, you know, because that's, you know, sometimes you need people to keep pushing you to go, you know what, maybe we haven't done enough. And you know, one of the things as leaders is you're there to serve your employees, because that's how you make the impact on the world. If your employees are not happy with your position, if your customers are not happy with your position, if you're ignoring what's going on in society, or you're picking and choosing based on what feels comfortable, that's a leadership problem. It's not a business problem.
Yeah, agreed. Is there anything perhaps that is important for leaders and employees alike, or people, that maybe we haven't touched on that would be useful to talk about here too?
I think it's just probably one thing that I would say is that, you know, in having these conversations, make sure you have Black people in the room. Wherever you, make sure you have Black people in the room. Don't default and set up like a Black listening forum and that be the only thing, and pretty much you only have Black people in the listening forum, because the reality is, like, as Black people, we don't need to convince each other, right?
Yes.
The people that really need to convince are not in the room, right? So you need to bring that together. So if you're going to do things like that, think about bringing in a cross section of people. And even if some people's role is just to listen, not everybody needs to interact. And then the other thing to say is, in the same way that you have to create a psychologically safe environment for your Black employees to be able to speak their truth, and you have to be prepared to the fact that you're going to hear some things that you can't unhear, which means you might have to take some action, or you might have to think differently. You also have to give your white colleagues the permission and say, do you know what, you might mess up. So there needs to be a very tacit agreement in the room that says, you know, say what you've got to say, my, you know, Black colleagues, and, you know, talk your experiences. We're going to hear from everybody in terms of what we need to do as a business to move things forward. But if you know that the people in the room, and the white people in the room, have already are doing some work, because it never stops. That's why I always say, like, it's ongoing. But they've done some work, so they're consciously aware. But you can't expect people to understand all the terminology, or understand why certain terminology is problematic overnight. So therefore, you can't shoot them down for saying the wrong thing.
Right.
And in this, it's very easy to see who genuinely said the wrong thing, versus those individuals who were just like, thank God, you know, I can finally say the things that I wanted to, you know, say. Do you remember when we were at school, and, you know, it's always the boys that worked out if you type certain numbers in the calculator, it said, do you remember that?
I knew what you were going to say before you got there, yes.
It's a little bit like that. So any time they like put the numbers in and go, you know, and it's a little bit like that. You can see the difference. And I think, you know, don't be afraid to use humor in the right places. Don't think that every conversation about race has to be a deep and meaningful. You can use funny anecdotes to still tell a very powerful story, because there is a danger is everyone thinks, oh my God, it's so heavy, and you almost get a reluctance to enter into the conversation more than once, because it's a bit like, I just want to hear some good news for a change. And it's a bit like, well, do you know what, that's our reality. But you have to have a cross section of your people in the room. And if you're a board and you're going to have this conversation, you need at least one Black person in the room. Otherwise, it's an echo chamber. You will never have that layer of conversation that you need to have.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to conclude the interview. I think great advice. And then, as I say, I think one of the threads that comes through talking to you and learning myself about how we need to engage here is like, do the work. Like, and you rightly say, if you don't like reading books, there's Netflix,
loads of stuff.
Google, what have you. And I think for all of us, regardless of what position you're in, that's a great place to start. And I know when you mentioned in the beginning, your first video, we talk about like the risk that you felt that you were taking. Clearly, one, you're kind of stopping doing a revenue generating exercise to do something that you're passionate about, but also knowing that you're risking future business, or certainly you felt that way at the beginning. So I think clearly brave step from your perspective, and one that we're benefiting from. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. No, thank you. It's been great to talk to you. So yeah.
You too. Listen, have a great rest of your day, and we'll speak again soon.
All right, Jon. Thanks. See you later.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.